Hello, I'm Greg Mehlin, and welcome back to Cinema Sit Down, a show where myself and others come together to talk about movies. For today's episode, we're going to be discussing Warner Brothers and DC's latest release, or would be latest if we hadn't really delayed this episode with terrible planning. Sorry about that. But we're going to be talking about The Batman, written and directed by Matt Reeves and starring Robert Pattinson as the titular Batman, who in this story, this retelling, he goes on a sort of mystery to discover the threat posed by the Riddler. So everybody already knows what happened in the movie then, so we're just going to get right into it. I'm joined today by Cooper Tennant and Luis Pagán. So how are you guys doing?
Doing good. I'm ready to talk about what I think is maybe the best comic book movie that I've seen. Maybe not the best movie, but I think it's the most accurate in terms of comic book movies.
Yeah, I'm doing good too, and I'm pretty excited because I've Batman was always one of my top tier superheroes ever since I was a kid. Him and Spider-Man always at the top, and so I really love this movie. So I'm really excited to talk about it.
All right, so I was going to ask for your initial thoughts, but you both already said you love the movie. So I'm just going to say I love the movie too. This was I don't know. I was gonna say something else, but all I could just think of was I loved it. And this is another Batman movie. Like, how many of these suckers have there been? And it should be getting old at this point, but I don't know. Batman just works for me then, and I thought that this was a really, really great retelling of it. Very fresh. So let's just get right into this then. So first, I want to say, I mean, obviously, one of the most important parts of Batman is the Batman himself, and I thought, this was both in terms of performance and character. This was a really strong version. Robert Pattinson did a great job. I'm glad to see him getting some more mainstream recognition, not just for Twilight. And I thought it was a fresh sort of take where he's not really the idealistic hero that you look up to here. He's really quite flawed, and he messes up several times. But I thought that it was a great seeing him grow throughout it. Then that's something that we typically don't see with these superhero movies. I guess they're usually all right. They're the hero, then that's done. That's their development. But so go on. What do you guys think of this version?
I would have to agree that it was pretty refreshing to see uh, an imperfect Batman because like especially on certain parts of TikTok, some of you might have seen where it's like, oh yeah, with enough prep time, Batman solos everyone, regardless of what happens. But uh, so it's like at some points it's like, oh yeah, he's like overpowered. He's perfect. He knows everything as long as he is able to like find things out, and he always finds out because he's the world's greatest detective. But in this movie, he's not because um, from the very beginning of the movie, you find out that he's only been doing this for 2 years. So he's still very new at this and he's very inexperienced in a lot of things. So a lot of stuff that he has been doing recently is either he's like only recently learned how to do or still hasn't learned and he's sort of like trial by fire. And so I thought that was a really nice touch that we don't really see from a lot of Batman content or superhero content in general, unless there's like a kid superhero. If it's an adult superhero, then they very rarely make mistakes, but this is the exception.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is my favorite depiction of Batman in like film. I'm also a really big Batman fan, and I've always kind of subscribed to the ideology that like Bruce Wayne is kind of the secret identity for Batman, not the other way around. And in this movie, that's really the direction that they took because you see a lot more Batman than you do Bruce Wayne. Like Bruce Wayne feels like secondary to Batman, which I've always really liked. Um, I love that it's like a new Batman. Still is kind of learning. He gets beat up quite a lot by regular people. I've always liked that it's not that Batman is like that much better than everybody else is that he can get back up and keep fighting. You know, he's not going to give up. And honestly, no spoilers, but the ending of this movie really, really hammers home that theme for the entire film. And I think that a sense of hope is kind of what's been missing from a lot of the Batman movies because they've been a little dark. And this one's dark, but the themes of it and the way that the story's told, I don't know. It's a very hopeful, I think, in terms of an ending and the character of Batman as a whole.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that. I really like the way that this ends. It does a great job of making me want more for what's to come, even though I just watched like friggin' 3 hours of this. So I will say, yeah, you know, comparing it to other versions, you talked about sort of the hope. You know, that was sort of what was missing recently. Like part of why I'm fine with the new Batman coming out so soon after another one was because the last few were kind of crap with Ben Affleck then, where he was a vicious murderer. I really want to stress, I'm so happy that we have a version of the character who doesn't kill anyone in this. Every other cinematic Batman, except George Clooney, killed somebody in some way, shape, or form. And it's like that's completely against the character of the comics then. I understand different strokes, but I'm just happy to see somebody who got that right. And I feel like Matt Reeves, you know, writer and director, like he totally gets this character and this world. You could see how much love he has for it, like in every frame. I think that he's like a perfect person to be guiding a new trilogy on this.
I agree. I think in terms of a vision, it's very clear that he had a very clear vision for what he wanted. I think his depiction of Gotham is maybe my favorite. It's not quite like the Art Deco that you see in like the animated series or like the weird Tim Burton version. But I think it might be the most like
Tim
comic
Burton,
book
weird.
or not. Well, opinions, but I think it's
It's not
definitely the
opinion, it's
most.
fact. Go on.
Yeah. I think it's definitely my favorite version. It just looks miserable, and that's kind of what I always envisioned Gotham City as being like. It's raining all the time. You know, there's crime constantly happening. Like honestly, the opening of this movie does a great job of introducing us to Gotham City, but then also to Batman. Like you see that there's constant crime, but you also see that Batman's whole moniker is that he hides in the shadows, and his thing is basically fear. You know, he's scaring people away from doing crime before they even do it, which I really enjoyed. But I don't know, this depiction of Gotham is really fun, and I love how everybody's sad, everybody's really miserable, and it just looks gross.
Yeah, this like while you're absolutely right that Gotham looks absolutely atrocious, it's atrocious in a oddly beautiful way because to me, Gotham City in this movie feels so much more alive than in past movies. Like, granted, like aside from like the Ben Affleck and Christian Bale movies, I haven't seen like any other Batman movies since I was a kid. And my mom was like, "Here, I got some Batman movies. Want to watch them?" I'm like, "Okay." Um, and and then but it's like usually whenever we see Gotham City, it's always like either, you know, on the rooftop when Batman's like talking to Commissioner Gordon or whatever, or like just like an outstretched bird's eye view of the whole city. This actually starts right from the get-go in the streets, right up against all the people. They're like crowded, they're celebrating Halloween in the rain. That's horrendous, but sure, fine. Um Goes to show that even though they're miserable, they're willing to put up with it for some reason. Uh, but like it's like right, you're basically going through the perspective of almost the average Gotham citizen, and I feel like that's something that like has been missing from a lot of superhero movies in general. Like they really sort of like over blow a lot of the scope. It's like, oh yeah, saving the world, saving the planet, and we sort of get like a very vague feel for that instead of like a really in-depth view um of you know the people that these heroes are trying to protect.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you know, talking about the sort of world here. Some that I really liked a lot was so that this, from what we've seen so far, is definitely a more realistic take on it, sort of like Christopher Nolan, but unlike that, which was definitely epic in execution, but still more, very much trying to feel more real. This, while more realistic than the average take, has that sort of comic book like grandiose theatricality, like a sort of a blend of I guess like Burton and Nolan or whatever, but not really copying either one of them. But I just like that. I don't know. It looks and feels like a comic book. There's so many great dynamics, like stills and whatever there. I mean, look at that. Look at that. Paul Dano. Ain't that awesome? Speaking of Paul Dano, so I already said, Robert Pattinson, I thought he did a stellar job in the role. Really fresh, really exciting. I love that. And I thought that he had a perfect supporting cast backing him up here. So, Zoe Kravitz, I had never seen Zoe Kravitz in like a main role. Everything that I saw her in before was just sort of like a small whatever. So this is really my true first impression of her as an actress. And I'd like to see more. I thought that she killed it as Catwoman here. I thought she perfectly played opposite Batman, and she was just really interesting and badass and dynamic. So Jeffrey Wright as Commissioner Gordon. I loved the chemistry between those two. Yeah, Cooper's got him right there. I loved his dynamic with Batman too, and Jeffrey Wright can do no wrong. I'm very glad that I have another opportunity on this show to say how much I love Jeffrey Wright, and not take a doo-doo on his movie like I do with The French Dispatch. And Andy Serkis, I thought he was a sort of different take on Alfred, but I thought he was really strong then. I thought he did a great job. I guess I maybe wanted to see a little bit more of him, but he still had a decently sized role nevertheless then I'm just rattling all these off. I want to talk about everybody because there's no weak link here. Colin Farrell, he looks like Richard Kind, but don't let that distract you. He does a great job. He's just fun in this movie. I don't know. This is some more low down, miserable tale. So he's bringing some camp goodness then there. John Turturro, who I had no idea was going to be a huge part of the movie then. I thought he was just going to be a minor player. I thought he was a great creep. And then Paul Dano, I love Paul Dano as an actor. I thought he was so good in this movie. Such a, I don't know, he's, at first I thought, oh, he's just going to be like a creepy, like a stoic villain then, but he's like really, really deranged and funny in it too. I thought that he was a great villain, and I like seeing the Riddler, who's kind of a joke. I like seeing him being taken seriously.
Like in previous Batman movies, or like like with some of the DCEU movies that feature Batman, some characters are just like either uh they're just like weirdly played, or just like the cast wasn't really good. Like example, Jared Leto as Joker. Still,
Mm-hmm.
I do not know why they did that, and it's like,
Yeah, I just like to briefly interrupt and then go on. For once, I'm not the person making fun of Jared Leto on an episode here.
oh my god,
That's new. That's definitely new.
yeah, it's like, yeah, I don't want to go on out. I don't need to go on a rant on him on that, or on Morbius or anything like that. But anyways, back to a good Batman movie. um, yeah, the cast in this movie was phenomenal. I honestly like every character, um, whether it was like even some of the antagonists, I couldn't help but like some like slightly root for, because I just like was so enamored by them, especially like the Penguin, absolutely hilarious. Like part of me was like, uh, kind of like I don't know how to describe it, but like I was sort of like matching his enthusiasm during this. I was about to drop a spoiler, but I don't, in case there's anyone who hasn't seen it. But there's just one scene where he's just like, "Yeah, let's go," and I just couldn't help but feel very upbeat with that, because like, because the his performance was just was amazing. And while the Penguin as a character did show like, oh yeah, one of the um rising gangster bosses in Gotham, it was like a little campy and jokey in a good way that offered like a little bit of like haha funny moments in this very grim and dark film. And that's one thing I'd like to mention real quick is that sometimes when people like take like stories like Batman or just whatever, they just like want to constantly make it super edgy, super dark, super serious and realistic, and it's just like to the point where it's just overkill. And that's something that I noticed definitely with the DCEU version of Batman, is that he was edgy just to be edgy. This Batman is edgy for a purpose. He has a reason to be that way. And not only that, they balance it out with like there are some occasional jokes, but they're very well written, and there is like some more lighthearted moments, especially towards the end, that really help balance it out instead of it all being dark, gloomy, and depressing.
Yeah, I I'll hop on that real quick, but I back to the cast. Like I feel like in a lot of the Batman movies, normally the people that you end up talking about, or at least the people that give a performance that's noteworthy, it's like Batman, Alfred, Lucius, if they decide to include Lucius Fox, and then the villain. But in this movie, I mean, you've got like the Penguin, Carmine Falcone, Catwoman, the Riddler, Batman, Gordon, like Alfred, like every single person that plays a character in this movie knows exactly what they're doing, and they know exactly what they need to like. It is campy, you know. It has its moments of camp, and on like moving on to like kind of the tone, like you were mentioning. It's it's the most, in my opinion, the most comic book movie because it is gritty and it is realistic. Like it's, I would even say it's more realistic than the Nolan movies. But it doesn't weigh itself down by that. It doesn't feel like it's being limited by the fact that it's realistic. Like the depiction that you're seeing, for me at least, is like is my like live action Batman at this point. I don't know. I love the technology that he uses, all the gadgets. Like it feels real. It feels attainable. Like, I mean, the gliding moment. That's a very like. I didn't know how I was gonna feel about that because I wasn't sure how they were gonna do it, but I ended up really liking it. Um, but I don't know. I just think like it's very comic booky. You know, it is gritty. It is real. It's edgy, but there's moments of levity. You know, and I think the Penguin is a great source of that levity. Jim Gordon's a great source of levity. The way that he talks to Batman, like in my eyes, the only people that should be talking to Batman like he's not a superhero is like the Robins, Alfred, and Gordon. And Gordon just like straight up calls Batman man in this movie several times. And I find that like so funny. And it's Jeffrey Wright. Like, of course he's gonna kill it every single time. But I don't know. I love the way that all these actors decided to play their characters because I feel like the comedic kind of Jim Gordon could turn a couple heads, but I'm all for it.
Yeah, I agree. And so, and with the whole comic book thing, this movie, it's not. Some of these comic book movies are almost like ashamed of their source material. Like, this is not the case. Like, it's a different take, but it is very, very true to how these stories are originally done and all that. And something that I liked a lot about it was it felt like it was addressing like previous criticisms of Batman. Like I mentioned, he thank God doesn't murder people in this one. And then there's also stuff like some people are all like, oh, Batman, he's like this rich jerk who beats up on poor people. And that's kind of like a plot element of this movie then. And there's also the famous like, oh, why doesn't Bruce Wayne just donate all of his money then to fix the crime? And that's another like plot element then. I'm not going to go into all the specifics, but it's sort of like showing like I don't know, it's just a fresh examination of what people deem to be flaws about the character, which really were not, but sort of addressing them anyway. And another thing that I really love is that, Batman is supposed to be the world's greatest detective, and most of the other Batman movies really didn't weigh in on that too much. He was more of an action star. Not that he didn't do some deduction or whatever, but this really does go for the detective angle where he's actively solving the crime throughout, then piecing everything together.
No, I really love the story, like the overall the mystery of it. I agree. This is the first Batman that's really been a detective, I think. We didn't really get that, at least. Well, the Nolan movies, it feels like he has robots that do all the detective work for him, and then the Ben Affleck version doesn't do any detective work at all.
No, he just
So
beats up people and kills them.
yeah, he runs over people with his car and
Or
shoots.
or
Yeah.
or does that weird Batman brand thing that
Oh yeah, I forgot
Right, he
about that.
branded
Oh,
people
he
so they got
brands
like
people.
killed in
They
prison,
got
I
killed in
think. I
prison.
don't
Yeah.
know. I
another
haven't seen that
example?
movie since the
Yeah,
theater.
another example of being edgy without a purpose.
Yeah, there's no. It's also it's Ben Affleck. Like how edgy can Ben Affleck be? But I liked that the story. Just to keep it brief and spoiler free, I loved that the story was socially aware. It felt it felt realistic because the characters were playing their parts realistically, and I think honestly Paul Dano did an amazing job of making the Riddler an extremely realistic character, at least in today's world. Like the Riddler feels like a person that would exist. Like this feels like something that someone would actually do. It feels like he the way that he connects his story with Batman's as well is also like perfect. You know, it's like two sides of the same coin. It's like one went this way, one went the other. And I'm not gonna say that he redeems himself in any way, shape, or form, but you have to have a little bit of sympathy for him. Because he's obviously like a lot of his rogues gallery are kind of mentally unwell. And it's obvious that there's some issues with the Riddler and I love the way that Paul Dano portrayed the character. I think some people might see his acting as not good. I have a friend who left after the scene in the prison because he couldn't stop laughing at the performance of Paul Dano. But I think that's kind of intentional. Like my theater was laughing, but I think it's I mean it's kind of uncomfortable laughter. You know, I don't know, just
Yeah.
keeping it
Well,
spoiler free. But
I mean, to just briefly intercut, he's like going for laughs with this performance, but and like you said, it's uncomfortable because it's this like emotionally stunted man child
he's very
who is
vulnerable.
incredibly unstable. Then, like he doesn't know that he's ridiculous. Then,
Yeah, and like leading up to the film, like I was a bit like I was like, okay, this is an interesting portrayal of the Riddler, but for someone who did somewhat enjoy the film where Jim Carrey plays a very haha goofy Riddler, and whenever I think of the Riddler, half the time I'm thinking of Riddler either from that movie or from the Batman animated series, or just how ridiculous he was in the Lego Batman video games. But I had like a slight soft spot for at least like either his goofy little like jumpsuit or his dapper green tux and top hat and cane. Like that is the suave magnificence of that. And like I was kind of like a bit like saddened that we weren't gonna get that, but I honestly appreciate this interpretation of Riddler because I was almost like a bit worried that they were just gonna make a super gritty version of a character that's normally very jokey in the comics. But this is like again going back to that whole thing of being edgy with a purpose, is that yeah, he's like has that super whole gritty out that whole gritty exterior, but at one point when Batman manages to sort of break him, he completely crumbles, and you realize how unstable and how much of a mess he is. And uh, like I just again back to what Cooper was saying about how most, if not all, of Batman's rogues gallery has some sort of mental instability. This is a really good example of yeah, a man child who doesn't realize he is. And again, going back to what was said earlier about how like Riddler being in a more like realistic and modern day setting, I just want to say the Riddler's a Redditor. Just gonna say that.
I mean, it really is like he has an online following. Like I think honestly, this real quick, this movie does a better job of doing what I think the Joker wanted to do, like the solo Joker movie. I think people watched that movie and they were like, oh, people, like, there's gonna be riots in the street, and like it's gonna overturn. Like, this is the movie where I feel like people should be having that reaction to this movie, because it shows how easy it is for people to kind of go down the wrong path, and it shows how easy it is for people to be susceptible to the wrong type of thinking. I don't know, in my opinion.
So I guess before we wrap up and say whether we recommend it, I think we're all going to recommend it. But just whatever final topics you guys want to cover. I personally want to talk about, there's all the technicals of this movie. The cinematography. I said each shot amazing, like the score, like the way that this soars, and like I don't know, that they play that a bunch of times. I never got sick of it because it sounds awesome.
I get chills like when I hear that. It's insane.
The sound, like I don't know, when like the Batmobile like revs its engine, it's awesome. And Luis, you were talking about with the Joker's, the Riddler's costume. Then what was I gonna say? All right, yeah, he looks like a gimp, but that just makes him scarier. Like all the looks of these characters are great, like sort of simplified but really true to the comics and their characters.
Yeah, especially with like the Batman's leitmotif, like his main theme every time he's like being a badass or something like that. One indication that theme has had such a powerful impact on viewers is that it's a trendy audio on TikTok. I see it all the time whenever it's like POV, you're jaywalking in Gotham, and all of a sudden you just see like a dark figure in the background, and then the first few notes of that of the Batman theme start playing. It shows that not only it's like, haha, it's a funny Batman meme, but also that theme is like so become so iconic that people are further sharing it and showing it off even more, making even more recognizable. And one thing about like the cinematography is that one thing that I absolutely loved in this movie was the fight scenes. Because looking back at some of the fight scenes in like the Dark Knight trilogy, personally, I feel like they're very clunky and a bit clumsy, and half the time they're like, you can't even understand what's going on. Like you almost can't even see Batman at all. But in this, everything's very fluid. You can see things very clearly. And every single time Batman was beating someone up, or even having someone beat him up, because that did happen a few times, I loved every second of it. These fight scenes, even though this is a more detective focused story, which I greatly appreciate, they did not take any shortcuts with the fight scenes.
Yeah, I agree. I really think that I mean, this is an early prediction, but I think we'll probably be seeing this movie a little bit next year at the Oscars. I think it would be really cool to get Matt Reeves a directing nomination, because it's so apparent that he really, really likes Batman, and I think he really, really gets Batman too. I'd like to see more from this world. They're doing like the Arkham show or whatever for HBO with the Penguin, but I know Matt Reeves said he didn't really want to do futuristic like stuff like that, or fantasy stuff, but I'd love to see Clayface, because we haven't really seen a Clayface in like a live action representation.
Yes,
but
please.
I don't know, I mean, the world that they built, like, it's like I only want more, and I hate 3-hour long movies, but this movie ended and I was like, just a little bit more, please. Like, I can't wait to see whatever they do next. And I think, Matt Reeves is kind of a trailblazing this new series. I'm hoping they do some more stuff. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm just going to quickly say before wrapping things up, then I'm also really excited for the future here. And my personal villain that I want to see, there's rumors about Mr. Freeze. I don't know how they do him in this more sort of low down setting, but I'd like to see it. I'd like to see a cinematic version of him that isn't Arnold Schwarzenegger doing ice puns. Then anyway,
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age.
Yes. Anyway, so I'm just going to give my recommendation. Nobody's going to see this in the theater still, but it's going to be on HBO Max shortly. I think watch it there. I don't know. I said everything I need to say. I love the
If
movie.
you can catch it on a big screen, catch it on a big screen. It is like
Definitely.
it's mind
Hell
blowing
yeah.
for real.
Absolutely.
I guess that's both of your recommendations. So we good then? All right.
We good.
So normally I would close out this show by telling you to watch other episodes and other Pirate TV content. But today, I have a bit of trivia that I'd like to share, which is, Robert Pattinson, when he first was auditioning for the role of Batman, he was working on the movie Tenet, everybody's favorite Christopher Nolan movie, obviously. And Christopher Nolan, the guy who directed the Dark Knight trilogy, Robert Pattinson told him some lie while he was going to go out and audition. And in his own words, Pattinson said, quote, "I said I had a family emergency. I said it." He goes, "You're doing the Batman audition, aren't you?" End quote. So that is our show. Thank you. Goodbye.